In this week's EV news, a record number of EV chargers were installed in the UK in 2022. A study shows that electric cars are driven further on average than petrol models, despite claims of range anxiety. California bans Tesla from describing its cars as full self-driving, and more IONITY chargers could be coming soon to the services at Chippenham. Welcome to the first EV news of 2023, and we've got some cracking stories lined up for you this week. As always, make sure you click that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to make sure you're one of the first to hear about the next video. First up, I can often be accused of only bringing you the doom and gloom, focusing on those negative stories that are out there. Well, here's a positive news story for once. A record number of public EV chargers were installed in the UK in 2022, with more than 8,700 being installed to the year to the 22nd of December. This brings the total available number to more than 37,000 according to ZapMap, who collect data on chargers and charging, as well as operating the popular website that we all know and love. This represents a 30% year-on-year increase, slower than the 38% annual growth in sales of electric cars during the year to November, but still showing that charger installations are in fact on the rise, despite some of the doom and gloom out there about there not being enough. Now, I'm sure some of you will still come at me in the comments and say, oh, well, it's still nowhere near enough, there's still not enough chargers out there, but what can we do? Boris Johnson's government announced a target of 300,000 public chargers by 2030, when that all-important ban on new petrol or diesel cars is planned to come into force. Year-on-year growth of 30% like this would be enough to meet that target, but that would mean that by 2025 we'd be installing 19,000 in a year, and that number would increase each year to 2030. So quite ambitious targets, and you've got to question really whether the current crop of providers are going to manage to do it. I also wonder whether we'd need to see some mergers and acquisitions to happen amongst the charging operators, because let's be honest, there are already far too many different operators, and if they all continue installing more and more chargers as we move ambitiously towards those targets, then public charging will be even more of a fragmented, convoluted mess than it is today. I think we need some simplification. I'm particularly concerned about the way local authorities are allowed to decide their own strategy for charger installations in their areas. It's very clear so far that this isn't working in certain parts of the country where, they're just completely neglecting it, and I think hoping that it will magically all be sorted out by 2030, presumably. We need common strategy that prioritises installations based on need, rather than just the availability of central government funding and then perhaps some of those incentives that operators can offer councils as well. I remember talking about Ubitricity a few months ago in a previous video where they were saying, oh well, councils can use us and we'll incentivise them to install chargers, and yeah, I'm not sure about that. But that being said, I've said a few times we should never moan about more infrastructure being installed, and I stand by that. So news of record numbers of chargers being installed is definitely positive, no doubt about that whatsoever. Feel free to tell me how much you disagree with that statement in the comments. Go on, knock yourselves out. Next up, an interesting study that I definitely think contradicts some of the most common misconceptions about EVs. New Automotive have found that electric cars are, on average, being driven 1,800 miles per year more than petrol cars, despite all the fuss about range anxiety. Using the data from MOT tests, it can be seen that EVs on average travel 6,000 miles a year versus 4,200 for petrol and 5,500 for petrol and diesel combined. Now, before you tell me in the comments that you do personally 100,000 miles a year in your diesel and you mostly do that without ever having to stop, remember that these are averages across every car in the country that goes through an MOT, so there will be a lot of reasons why those numbers might be a bit lower than you expect. The chief executive at New Automotive said that buyers of electric vehicles are likely to be using them for frequent short trips. That's an assertion that I'm not sure I 100% agree with, but it's one possible explanation for seeing the higher mileage. He also said that range anxiety has been significantly overstated, probably for a number of years now. It was probably more of an issue when batteries were smaller and that when the charging infrastructure was more sparse. Now that I do agree with. Modern EVs with larger batteries and faster charging almost entirely remove any notion of range anxiety for me. I don't know about you, but driving something with a bigger battery that can charge at 100 kilowatts, 150 kilowatts, you don't even really think about range personally. I think it's far more likely though that people are buying an EV that actually need to use the car that they've spent loads of money on. Whereas there's bound to be loads of petrol and diesel cars around, particularly older ones that barely owe their owner anything, or you've got classics and stuff that are deliberately not driven very far, and those must be skewing the numbers. The new automotive data also suggests though that EVs with medium-sized batteries, like 40 to 50 kilowatt hours, like the Leaf, Peugeot E208, that kind of thing, travel just as far as models with the biggest batteries. Now that suggests that there's less concern about smaller batteries being usable, so maybe we need to scale back this out-and-out obsession with range and adding bigger and bigger batteries. I think they're being bought by people who need a car that's a real workhorse, looking for something that is going to save them money, and of course, it saves them money if they do a lot of miles, said Mr. Nelms. It's an interesting story, I'm sure you'll agree, and it is one that definitely goes some way to counteract some of the utter drivel out there that suggests that EVs are less usable. It's interesting stuff from New Automotive, and I'm sure we're going to see more data like this from them in the future. Over to news from California now, where a new law has come into effect that bans Tesla and other car makers from advertising their cars as full self-driving, the name given to Tesla's popular semi-autonomous driving feature, amid concerns that such claims are misleading consumers. Senate Bill 1398, sponsored by Democrat State Senator Lina Gonzalez, states that car manufacturers and dealers must provide consumers with a clear description of the function and limitations of these semi-autonomous driving features. The bill prohibits a manufacturer or dealer from deceptively naming, referring to, or marketing these features, said the bill signed by California Governor Gavin Newsom in September and set to come into effect on the 1st of January 2023. Even though Tesla has claimed that its cars have a full self-driving feature, the company is yet to demonstrate that its vehicles can safely engage in complete autonomous driving without driver assistance. The company has also been named in several legal cases and investigations over its advanced driver assistance system, as well as an ongoing investigation by the US Department of Justice over its advertising for its autopilot features. A manufacturer or dealer shall not name any partial driving automation feature or describe any partial driving automation feature in marketing using language that implies or would otherwise lead a reasonable person to believe that the feature allows the vehicle to function as an autonomous vehicle. The main reason this caught my attention was I can see this being the case elsewhere in the world too. California, of course, famous for being a little bit overcautious when it comes to health and safety and putting warnings on things, but I've always thought that autopilot, full self-driving, these feature names used by Tesla were a little bit misleading. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think we'll see other governments take action on this and take California's lead? Introduce legislation to actually control how these features are being marketed? I certainly hope so. And finally, some more positive news about charger installations. I know, right? Twice in one video. Wow. The owners of a service station just off the M4 are hoping that they're going to be allowed to install 12 additional EV charging points. Chippenham Pit Stop, a family-owned business at junction 17 of the M4, say that their business has been boosted by the installation of 6 charging points in the past 2 years. 4 350 kilowatt charging points were installed by IONITY in December 2020 at this location, and they increased that number to 6 in October 2022. If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll remember that I charged the e-tron 55 that I had from Onto for a bit at this location and had an overall decent experience there. Although it was actually quite clear at that time that it was a very popular location for charging indeed, and that some expansion was going to be required in the future to keep up with demand. The video link is in the comments if you'd like to check it out. Managing Director David Hathrow is now hoping that Wiltshire planners will approve the installation of 12 more charging points that he claims put his business on the map. He said, while providing first-class facilities for our hundreds of trucker customers remains our core business, there's no doubt that the installation of charging points has significantly increased our general public footfall over the past 12 months. The chargers really put us on the map for motorists on the M4 because while powering up they also stopped for coffee or popped into a restaurant for meals. Not only that, word appears to have spread among their friends without electric cars that Chippenham pit stop was a great place to take a break. Now I always think this is great news, right? Someone's looking to install more charging points, but especially in cases like this, where they're doing so because the ones they have proved to be a roaring success. Increasing the number of chargers at this location to 18 would make it a massive hub for the M4. It's already very popular as it is, but I hope that the planners see sense, wave this one through, and I can't think of any real reason why they wouldn't do that. It's already an established service area and it will just have some more cars going there rather than just trucks. But that's all for this week's EV news. Do let me know your thoughts on any of this week's stories in the comments, and make sure that you've both liked this video and subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on the next one. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. In this week's EV news, electric cars outsold petrol in the UK last month. Kia will launch 9 new electric models in the UK by 2023. EV drivers are being hit with surge pricing at thousands of public chargers, and a little known fire safety regulation prevents the installation of chargers at a new leisure complex in Preston. Welcome back to another EV news, and we've got a good mix of positive and negative articles this week, which might be the antidote to those of you that were saying it was all a little bit too rosy last time. As always, make sure you click the like button, and if you're new here, subscribe as well to make sure you don't miss out on the next one. First up, would you believe me if I told you that electric cars outsold petrol ones last month? Well, the figures from the SMMT are in, and that is exactly what happened. Pure electric vehicles took a 32.9% share of the UK car market in December, marking the biggest ever monthly market share for EVs, and narrowly pipping petrol cars, which made up the second largest share at 32.8%. What I find really interesting about this is if you look at the actual units sold, 42,284 battery electric vehicles were sold in December 2022 versus 27,705 in 2021. So that's either a massive uptick in demand or it's indicative of the taps being turned on in terms of supply. In reality, it's probably a little bit of both, isn't it? Perhaps rather unsurprisingly, the real loser was diesel. 4,006 units were sold this December versus 5,201 last year. That's a 23% decrease and another step towards diesel becoming increasingly irrelevant for passenger cars. Year-to-date figures show that battery electric vehicles now have a 16.6% market share, with a total of 267,203 new registrations in 2022. Diesel, petrol and mild hybrid diesel are all down on the previous year, although I'm surprised to see that plug-in hybrids are also down. 101,414 were sold in 2022, which is an 11.5% decrease on 2021. I wonder if some plug-in hybrid buyers are being converted to full electric, and those even more favourable tax treatment for company car users might be one big incentive for them to do so. Providing a fully electric car suits your needs, I can certainly see why people would take the leap. The best-selling car in December of all fuel types was the Tesla Model Y, with 10,664 units registered. It also takes the number 3 spot of all cars sold in 2022, with 35,551 in total, closely pipped by the venerable Vauxhall Corsa in second place, and the Nissan Qashqai takes the crown with a total of 42,704 sales. The Model Y is unsurprisingly also the best-selling electric car of the year, with the Model 3 in second place at 19,071 units and the Kia e-Niro in third at 11,197. There's a link in the description to the SMMT website if you want to see all the facts and figures and all the glory, but I do think it makes for interesting reading. I wonder though, what do those sales figures actually mean in terms of trending, and what are they going to look like going forward? The impending 2030 ban on one hand, which should reduce petrol and diesel sales and boost EV sales, but increased taxation, removal of incentives and increasing energy costs on the other hand, potentially balancing that out. I mean, there's currently no sign at the moment of things slowing down though, and those supply issues that have plagued EV delivery times seem to be easing up at least a little bit for some manufacturers, which should make things a little bit easier. Upcoming new car model news next, and Kia have announced that they will launch 9 new pure electric cars into the UK market by 2027. This announcement forms part of their business roadmap leading up to 2030, where they'll launch 14 new electric cars worldwide. It makes us wonder which ones we're not getting, but this push for electrification is a key component in Kia's bid to sell 4 million vehicles annually by the end of the decade, with over a quarter of those predicted to be battery electric vehicles. Several of these new EVs that are planned will be based on the same eGMP platform that underpins the hugely popular EV6. Kia has trademarked badges ranging from EV1 to EV9, and the latter will join the EV6 in the lineup when it is revealed later this year. It builds upon the concept EV9, which made its debut in 2021, and the large SUV will offer 7 seats and a boxy, upright design, much like the concept car had. A small EV4 crossover is also expected to arrive in the near future, based on a shortened version of the eGMP platform. Going head to head with the likes of the BMW iX1, it could offer more than 300 miles of range thanks to that powertrain borrowed from the EV6, so I'm sure that will make it a very strong player in the market. Another one of Kia's goals for 2030 is to become a leading global brand for purpose-built vehicles, where they'll build customised versions of their sort of standard cars for corporate customers, who increasingly are expecting bespoke products tailored to their exact needs. For now, these vehicles will be built upon existing platforms like the eNiro Plus that is aimed at taxi fleets and ride-hailing services, but by 2025 and beyond, they'll be producing a dedicated skateboard platform for these customisable models. I think that might be quite interesting indeed. What's more interesting, I think, is when these custom vehicles will end up on the sort of secondary market once the big fleets are done with them, and they'll be a bit weird and wonderful, a bit like when you buy an ex-police car, I guess, and it's got all sorts of strange specification that you wouldn't normally get. Across its manufacturing facilities, Kia will also be switching to more sustainable production methods, recycled materials and using renewable energy where possible. All steps that I'm sure you can agree are very welcome when we're talking about producing cars that are at least supposed to have a decreased impact on the environment. I can't wait personally to see some more of these new models coming up from Kia. I know that there are a number of you driving cars like the eNiro and the EV6, and they're absolutely smitten with them, think they're absolutely fantastic, so some more of the same in some different formats sounds like it'd be very welcome indeed. Let me know what you think in the comments. Public charging doom and gloom now, or at least that's the way it was presented in this article in the Telegraph that I'm referencing. The headline is, "Electric vehicle drivers hit with surge pricing at thousands of roadside charging points." But I'm not sure it's actually as negative as the way that we're clearly trying to spin it in this article. But what we're seeing and what's being described here is time of use pricing. And time of use pricing make it through to the public charging networks. As you may or may not know, the wholesale price of electricity varies depending on the time of day and therefore how much demand there is across the grid. You can have this type of pricing at home if you want. Octopus Energy offer a tariff called Agile, where you have half-hour pricing. So every half-hour slot of the day has a different rate depending on the wholesale price and how much demand there is. It's really interesting, and I think at least it's a really clever tariff that shows very well what the future of energy retail could look like. Why pay an average cost for all of the time that takes into account the fact there will be peaks and troughs, when actually you can just own it, right? And you can pay exactly the going rate at the time that you're consuming energy. And it means you can shift demand to cheaper times. and take full advantage of that if possible. And obviously sometimes you will need to suck it up and pay, but I think overall you end up coming out ahead. The article reports that Ubitricity and Genie Point are both rolling out dynamic pricing on their networks, where you will pay more to charge during peak times. Or, if we take the negative spin back a little bit, you will pay less to charge during off-peak times. Ubitricity charges 79 pence per kilowatt hour during their peak times, which are 4 PM to 7 PM, but this drops down to 45 pence the rest of the time, down from their previous rate of 49 pence 24 hours a day. Now this is clearly a reaction to the ever-increasing wholesale prices, but I actually quite like the concept, and I like the fact that they're giving you the choice here. You can decide whether or not your need to charge is urgent enough that you'll pay a little bit more to do so during those peak times, but actually if you can work your schedule so you charge at a different time, you'll pay less. Genie Point are offering a tariff of 57 pence per kilowatt hour from 8 PM to 8 AM and 75 pence the rest of the time. Now, given how rapid charging providers are charging rates in the 70s pretty much all day long anyway, that sounds actually like quite a good deal to me. If you can charge in the off-peak times, you're going to pay less. And I honestly believe that this type of charging will be the future for public EV charging. And if I'm perfectly honest, for home energy supply as well. Flat rate tariffs, I think, will become a thing of the past sooner rather than later, and I think you will be paying based on when you're actually consuming. When asked by The Telegraph about these moves, Ubitricity said, "Between 4 PM to 7 PM, the price that we are paying to supply our charge points with electricity more than doubles due to peak demand on the national grid. Rather than distribute this increased cost to all of our customers through our standard pricing, we have decided to limit this price increase to a peak window. And this ensures that we offer the best value reduced rate to our customers for the majority of the time." I mean, I think that sounds fair enough. And I think there's an unnecessarily negative spin on this. I don't know about you though, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. But overall, I think variable pricing is a good thing, and as long as the tariffs are communicated clearly, I welcome it, and I hope that we'll see more of it from other operators in the future. And finally, planning meets fire safety in a strange outcome for a new leisure complex in Preston, where councillors have reluctantly had to agree to remove EV charging points from the plans for Preston's new cinema, restaurant and recreation development in order to comply with fire safety regulations. Now, when I first saw this, I thought that this was just a load of clickbait rubbish in the media. But no, there was originally a planning condition that required 18 of 164 spaces in this development to be reserved for EVs, which they're unable to meet due to fire regulations. The car park is in the basement, and apparently putting chargers in a below ground car park is not compliant with current fire safety regulations. They'll future-proof the car park by running cabling that would enable chargers to be installed later, so if there's any change in the regulation they can implement them, a lot easier. A Town Hall Planning Officer James Mercer said that if newer methods of charging that are safer than those we currently have, it means we won't need to dig up the car park to put them in. And I must admit, this is news to me and it totally caught me by surprise. But remember Part S of the building regulations that governs the requirements for EV charging installations? Well, it has provision that says covered car parks, like the basement one here, should have EV charging provisioned in spaces that are outside and that are not undercover. And if that is not possible, cables should be run for future provision later. And I'm absolutely gobsmacked by this because I had no idea that there are fire regulations in place that prohibited EV charging in covered car parks like this. And this could be seriously limiting, if you think about it, for charging infrastructure rollouts in the future. And you've got to ask the question, is there really more risk from an EV charging than there is of a petrol or diesel car parking up and potentially combusting? We already know which of those two catch fire most often, and it's not the one you might think if you're of a slightly anti-EV bias. I do wonder if we'll see revised fire regulations in the future, or if charging in a basement will remain a no-no forever. There must be hundreds of buildings out there, leisure developments like this, office blocks, blocks of flats, arguably more importantly, where you definitely want, ideally, to be able to install chargers in the basement to allow people to charge the cars while they're parked up. Let me know what you think in the comments. I think it's hugely limiting, and it'll be really interesting to see if that's ever changed going forward. That's it for this week's EV news. Make sure you've clicked that like button and subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you so much for watching as always. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments about all of these stories, and I'll see you next time. In this week's EV news, Ford announced they'll move away from using Volkswagen's technology in their new electric cars. The weight of electric cars is the newest reason you definitely shouldn't buy one. Tesla delight some and disappoint others by slashing prices around the world. And shock horror, using electric cars for long journeys can cost more than using petrol. Welcome back to another EV news, and this week I've got some hotly debated topics as well as some you might not have heard of. As always, click that like button, and if you're new here, make sure that you subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on the next one. First up this week, and we're talking about Ford and their move to cut dependence on Volkswagen's technology for their new electric cars. Their partnership's first joint project was self-driving commercial vehicles, a project which was later cancelled, but their joint development of cars was thought to be continuing. In the next couple of years, Ford are planning to launch 2 cars using Volkswagen's MEB platform, the underpinning for cars like the ID3 and ID4, and including assembly of VW source batteries. However, after 2024, they are expected to switch to their own in-house developed system that's being engineered in the US, something which seems to have been confirmed by their head of electric vehicles in Europe, Martin Sander. He went on to say, "We are exploring all kinds of opportunities. How far can we go? What kind of segments can we cover with this?" Adding, "It has no kind of integration with Volkswagen. It is very versatile and very capable." It seems that the final decision on Ford and VW's future is yet to be made, but Ford remain open to future collaborations, even if the use of the MEB platform is going to be far more limited than was originally predicted. Now, it seems a little odd to me really that Ford are yet to even sell any of these models that they're going to collaborate with VW on and platform share on, but they're already looking to phase it out. And while they may still be open to future partnerships and haven't completely ruled that out, I do think it represents a huge blow for this idea that some people have that EV manufacturers are going to pool resources and they're going to share technology. A lot of people seem to think that this is the way forward, but I think this example of platform sharing coming to an end before it's even really started suggests that the big car manufacturers just aren't going to do that and that they have other ideas. We want to see manufacturers try to bring their own innovations to the party and develop their own platforms, or would we rather that they actually focused on actually building cars, shipping cars, meeting demand, and therefore a bit of collaboration on the tech isn't that big a deal? Well, there's bound to be many different opinions on that, so do let me know what you think in the comments. Next up, I've heard the vast majority of red-hot anti-EV takes and reasons you shouldn't buy one, but this one that manages to both be new and still quite ridiculous, so I thought it was worth highlighting. Apparently, fat EVs are likely to cause more death on our roads. So, how did the US National Transportation Safety Board come to that conclusion then, I hear you ask? Well, they've basically cited that a number of large EVs like the Mustang Mach-E, the humongous GMC Hummer EV and the Volvo XC40 are all much heavier than their gas-guzzling counterparts. So while we may be addressing emissions, their chair has also stated that we have to be careful that we aren't also creating unintended consequences or more death on our roads. Now, there's no getting away from the fact that a heavier car has the potential to do more damage in the event of a crash. But the United States isn't exactly known for small, compact, lightweight cars, is it? No matter what powers them. They have been putting increasingly large and heavy vehicles on the road long before electric cars were on the scene. So this American obsession with driving something the size of a small country is more likely to blame for any increase in deaths because of big vehicles over the fact that EVs might weigh a little bit more. I mean, I'll be interested to know your thoughts on this one, but this feels to me much more like or should I say Americans, are obsessed with buying ridiculously large cars problem, rather than a EVs are too heavy and will kill people issue. What I will say though, is that we desperately do need more small, lightweight electric cars. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But manufacturers at the end of the day are going to continue to build and sell what the market demands, and ultimately what is profitable for them. So if we continue to line up in droves to buy pickups and SUVs, then that's what they're going to make, isn't it? Let's be honest. Let me know what you think in the comments though. Will increasingly large EVs cause more death on our roads? I'm not so sure. Now the big one that I'm sure you're all here for. Tesla have slashed prices across their range globally. Up to 20% discount in some instances. And this is a move which is seen as an aggressive effort to challenge their rivals. Now this goes very much against Tesla's previous strategy over the past few years where, I mean, like most EV manufacturers, their new orders and therefore demand are massively outstripping their supply, so why would you reduce prices? Musk acknowledged last year that prices had become embarrassingly high and that could hurt demand. It seems that they have taken the move to open up their cars to a wider audience and sustain growth to recover after the stock price has had its worst year since the company's inception. As we exit what has been a turbulent year of supply chain disruptions, we have observed a normalisation of some of the cost inflation, giving us the confidence to pass these through to our customers, is the formal line coming out of the company. In the UK, this means that an entry-level rear-wheel drive Tesla Model Y will now cost you £44,990, a price drop of £7,000 that sees it undercut the likes of the Kia EV6. And it puts serious price pressure on a lot of other manufacturers who are playing at this sort of price range. I'm sure it will sway a number of buyers towards the Model Y, especially once this new pricing filters through to leasing companies for those company car drivers where the price of leasing is a direct reason either why that's the car you'll be able to get or not, or your personal contribution might be a bit lower if the lease is cheaper. How has the news been taken though? Well, some people are absolutely delighted, of course. Those about to place an order, or those with an order that's not been delivered yet, where Tesla are adjusting the prices to reflect this new pricing, well, they'll be absolutely thrilled, won't they? You've learned that you just saved a bunch of money. Nobody's going to argue with that. Might I remind you, though, of those record-beating sales in December that we featured in the first video of the year. 10,644 Tesla Model Y and 5,704 Model 3 were sold just a month ago at those old prices, which means there'll be more than a few people a little bit annoyed, both that they've overpaid and that their cars are instantly worth significantly less than they paid for them in the course of a month. This attitude reflects across the world, where there was even protests in China when the price drop was announced. A significant number of customers are very upset about this, it seems. Used prices are, of course, also taking a tumble. We are at a point where used cars on the market were being sold for more than the new list prices, so of course there's going to be a correction there. It's very bad news if you were recently thinking about selling and you're now facing a lower valuation, but it's potentially good news, I suppose, if you want to buy a used Tesla in the future and want that to be a little bit cheaper. Such dramatic changes to these prices of new cars is a very interesting strategy though. Crashing the used market overnight isn't the typical play for most car manufacturers, but then I'm sure, as you'll tell me, Tesla aren't most car manufacturers. I do think some people have been a little bit unrealistic about depreciation and used values though, because whilst nobody would ever expect to effectively see, double-digit depreciation overnight because the manufacturer has slashed the cost of a new car, equally EV prices for any make and any model have been massively overinflated over the past couple of years because of supply shortages and the high demand. So, I mean, I think a correction was always going to happen, wasn't it? Cars do depreciate over time, and that's not going to change just because they use a different fuel type. I think it's absolutely bonkers to think that someone is going to continue to want to pay nearly the same as a brand new vehicle for one that's a year old, 2 years old, or whatever. I mean, that's never going to be sustainable in a million years, because people will always choose new given the choice. And I think if you're one of the people that were banking on it, these like crazy residuals being the case, I think there's a few more surprises to come in the used EV market. I don't think this will be the last correction of prices for EVs, not just including Tesla, and I am certain of that. And finally, shock horror. It is expensive to use rapid chargers. In a style that seems to be rather prolific at the moment, the Telegraph is reporting that electric cars are now more costly than petrol for long journeys. I mean, what they've done here, they've used the usual type of analysis from the RAC, and they've come to the conclusion that it's £10 more expensive for a typical long journey in an EV than it is in a petrol car. So they've concluded that at an average of 70.32 pence per kilowatt hour, driving 484 miles charging on the public network costs £92.69 in the typical EV, whereas filling up with petrol would cost £83.03. Now, in fairness to them, they've actually been reasonably reasonable with the averages here, so about 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour. I think that's fairly representative of a typical EV. Yeah, there are some more efficient ones out there, but... And then the petrol costs, I think they equate to about 40 miles to the gallon roughly, which is achievable in a lot of different models, so I don't have particular issue with that, and that's usually where these studies fall down. But what I have got a problem with is these figures will undoubtedly be quoted by all and sundry, completely out of context, repeatedly to demonstrate that, oh, it's suddenly super expensive to use an EV and you should definitely switch back to petrol or diesel, completely ignoring the fact that the first couple of hundred miles of those journeys in the vast majority of modern EVs would be carried out with energy that you've bought at home for a far lower price. Now, I know that not everyone has access to home charging, but quite frankly, at the moment, with the way things are, I struggle to believe that there's anything more than a tiny minority of EV owners without access to home charging that are regularly making 484 mile journeys. Let's be realistic. I know you'll shoot me down in the comments for saying that. And I know that, you know, you have never had a home charger and you drive from John O'Groats to Land's End every day in your EV and it's absolutely fine and it's cheap as chips, but let's be realistic. That's not to say, though, that things need to improve. We cannot expect people without home charging to switch to an EV if it is going to actually be more expensive than petrol or diesel for them to run an EV, because that's just not going to happen. Not at the rate that would need to be sort of feasible anyway for those 2030 and beyond targets. Urgent action is definitely required to bring down the cost of public charging. And cutting the VAT rate to 5% to match that of domestic electricity would definitely go a long way in helping with that. But I said it in the last video and I'll say it again, I would also like to see more dynamic pricing that would allow people to take advantage of cheaper off-peak rates on the public networks. And I know that not everybody agrees with me on that. I mean, it drove some pretty strong reactions in the comments of the last video, with the usual tripe about the networks using it as an excuse to keep the peak time prices high and all this. But I'm firmly of the opinion that operators could use this to drive utilisation at times where their chargers just simply are not being used. People just aren't using them at these sort of weird and off-peak times. They just sit empty, losing money. Imagine if, for example, we could legitimise people charging in a closed supermarket's car park overnight, removing the stupid parking rules we often see for being there out of hours, and charging a lower rate for the electricity than usual. This could be hugely transformative in the value of the proposition for electric cars amongst people that don't have home charging, and hugely transformative for local communities in those areas. It just takes owners or operators to be a bit forward thinking and start actually offering it. I mean, you're not even talking about something that would need investment. You just need to change some processes so that you're allowed to park here overnight and the charging's slightly cheaper. It's all pretty easy, isn't it? Anyway, that's all for this week's EV news. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments on all of these stories. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. In this week's EV news, Britishvolt collapses into administration. Wyoming legislators want to ban sales of electric cars by 2035. Citroen CEO says the electric car will kill the SUV. And Liverpool claim they're going to be the North's most electric car friendly city. Welcome back to another EV news. Quite a lot to cover this week, so let's get straight into it. As always, make sure you like this video, and if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't miss out on the next one. First up, some sad news from battery gigafactory hopefuls Britishvolt, who have collapsed into administration. Their ambitious plans to open a battery factory for electric cars in Blyth, Northumberland, was hailed as a levelling up opportunity by government ministers that was said to be able to boost the region's economy and support the future of UK car manufacturing. Unfortunately, the plans for the £3.8 billion factory, part of a long-term vision to boost UK manufacturing of electric vehicle batteries and create around 3,000 skilled jobs, fell apart as the company struggled to turn a profit, and it ran out of money. Its board decided that there were no viable bids to provide funding for the company and keep it afloat. The UK currently only has one Chinese-owned battery plant next to the Nissan factory in Sunderland, while 35 plants are planned or are already under construction in the European Union. The ambitious but financially troubled startup only narrowly avoided collapse at the end of last year after an emergency lifeline was extended to it by one of its investors, the commodity trading giant Glencore. Last year, Britishvolt asked the government to advance £30 million of an agreed £100 million in support, but it was refused since the company had not hit agreed construction milestones to access those funds. And this is very bad news indeed. I think it's even worse, of course, for the 232 members of staff that will lose their jobs. You've got to ask the question though, was creating a £4 billion facility from scratch without the backing of a major manufacturer ever going to work? I mean, I'm all for ambitious startups, but it seems to me like Britishvolt bit off a little bit more than they could chew. It almost has the feeling that they were out to just milk government funding for all it was worth. Of course, they didn't ever get to that stage because they couldn't even get it off the ground enough to start accessing the government funding that had been agreed. But I am a little bit sceptical of what their motives might have been. I do wonder though what the future will hold for the site in Blyth. Will someone with more experience and more ability to actually secure actual orders pick up the pieces from the administrators and turn it into reality? There's an awful lot of eyes on the government right now, hoping that they'll be spurred into action to develop a proper industrial strategy that actually includes battery manufacturing in order to maintain a viable car manufacturing industry in the UK, but any positive action from government on this remains to be seen. Let me know what you think in the comments. Was Britishvolt doomed right from the start? Do you think someone more experienced will step in and take over? Or are we destined to just, well, have an ever declining car manufacturing capability here because there's just no appetite to build batteries in the UK? Well, I'm sure you'll have many opinions on that one, so do keep them coming in the comments. Some absolutely batshit crazy, difficult to believe news out of the good old US of A next, where legislators in Wyoming have put forward a bill that would reduce, restrict or even ban the sale of electric vehicles by 2035 in order to protect the interests of the oil and gas industry. No, really. You haven't heard that wrong. When I saw the headline at first, I thought it was the usual, where they were moving, like many countries in the world are, to ban the sale of petrol or diesel cars in favour of electric. Nope, not this time. The exact opposite. The Senate Joint Resolution number SJ0004 expresses support to phase out the sale of new electric vehicles in Wyoming by 2035, citing that oil and gas production has long been one of Wyoming's valued industries, creating countless jobs and contributing revenues to the state throughout the state's history. These are direct quotes from the resolution. There's a link to it in the comments if you don't believe me. You can have a look. The gasoline-powered vehicle has enabled the state's industries and businesses to engage in commerce and transport goods and resources more efficiently throughout the country. Wyoming's vast stretches of highway, coupled with a lack of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, make the widespread use of electric vehicles impracticable for the state. And it goes on and on. It's almost like they've taken YouTube comments about EVs on any EV video and turned them into an actual proposal for legislation. You got stuff in here about mining of battery minerals, recycling and disposal of batteries, charging infrastructure needing vast amounts of power. Everything, every anti-EV trope you can think of is in this proposed piece of legislation. And finally, it basically states that gasoline-powered vehicles have been great for ages, so why bother changing them? I mean, it really does read like the kind of mince you'll see throughout social media wherever EVs are being discussed. And as I said, there is a link in the comments to the actual official Wyoming government website where you can read this tripe, and it's absolutely hilarious. You need to read it to believe it. But in summary, the proposal is to phase out the sale of new electric vehicles with a view to ending them completely from 2035, strongly encouraging Wyoming's industries and citizens to limit the sale and purchase of new electric vehicles with a goal of phasing them out completely. It hasn't been voted on yet, so you can be sure that eyes around the world will be closely watching to see if the rest of Wyoming's legislators are quite as crazy as the 4 senators, including Senator Boner and 2 representatives that sponsored the resolution. I have absolutely nothing more to say on this matter, apart from wow, but I'm sure you'll have plenty of opinions on it in the comments. How many of you think Senator Boner is the leader we all need to take on the hardest challenges of legislator? Let me know in the comments. Speaking of batshit crazy, Citroen have entered the chat with their CEO saying that the demise of the SUV is inevitable. The world of SUVs is done, although right now the numbers are not telling me I'm right, he says. Of course, SUV type vehicles accounted for 50% of all new car registrations in Europe over the past few years. So I definitely see where he's coming from with the numbers not quite working out. But what we are seeing is the emergence of basically saloons that are kind of being labelled as SUVs because they ride a little bit higher. But they're far from it, like the new Citroen C4X, which was the vehicle that was being talked about when these comments were made. One major reason for moving away from the traditional SUV shape to something a little bit more streamlined is, of course, aerodynamics. If you're building an EV, then the range penalty of poor aerodynamics is huge. You only need to look at the range of something like the Audi e-tron, like the one I had towards the end of 2021, to see that it suffers massively due to its size and weight, and that we'd be doing very well to move away from that kind of car to increase efficiency. Citroen is generally moving in a different direction to other manufacturers with its EVs by tending to stick with smaller batteries, the 50 kilowatt hour pack that is seen in most of the vehicles, while the radical Ollie concept that they released last year shows that the French company is committed to staying lightweight even as it transitions to a fully electric future. Their CEO doesn't deny that there's a risk in moving away from the kinds of cars customers will actually want to buy, but it suggests that there could be a bigger problem to come by failing to change tactics early. If we stick to SUV boxes until 2030 and discover that there's no customer for them, it's going to be a hard landing. You don't want to be the last one to leave the dance floor, he says. Now, this is a subject that is massively polarising. You've got people on one side of the argument who couldn't possibly give up their massive SUV, and they see that the electric drivetrain making it cleaner means that the problem is solved and you can continue driving 3 tonnes around on the streets of London. And you have people that think, well, everybody should be driving something small. Everybody should be in something like a Citroen Ami, as small a footprint as possible. So I think the reaction to this notion that the SUV will die out will be a very, very mixed one. Personally, I think it's obvious that we need to move away from this notion of having the biggest possible car with the biggest possible battery just because one day a year I might need 400 miles of range, and look at what we can actually do to make do with something smaller, lighter and cleaner. I absolutely love the Ollie concept from Citroen, and I would love to see manufacturers actually take on that challenge of lightness, efficiency, innovative materials, and take it seriously when they're creating EVs. But until the mass market wants it, I'm not sure it'll actually happen. And finally, Liverpool could become the North's most electric car friendly city as they appoint Ubitricity to install a network of 300 EV charging points, with the locations chosen by residents and businesses. You'll remember in a previous news video that I said that Ubitricity, who are owned by Shell, were offering councils fantastic deals on charger rollouts, where the actual cost of doing so is pretty low, using the available central government funding to its fullest, and I guess that's exactly why they've been chosen by Liverpool City Council in this case. The additional charge points will be set to treble Liverpool City Council's existing network of 150, making Liverpool the authority with the third largest public charging network in the country, falling behind London and Coventry. London was kind of obvious, but Coventry not so much. The rollout comes as part of a two-part project, which will see Ubitricity take over the repair of Liverpool's existing charging infrastructure, now that's really good news, and then roll out more charge points to enable residents to make that transition to EV a little bit easier. The rollout is being led by community requests, with Liverpool City Council receiving more than 10 requests a week for new public charge points. Councillor Dan Barrington, Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Highways for Liverpool City Council, said, "I'm delighted that we've begun to install this new network of EV charge points because it provides a huge boost in tackling poor air quality and reducing the city's carbon footprint. This programme puts down a real mark of intent to provide the necessary infrastructure to help the move away from petrol and diesel powered cars. And the fact that this rollout is being led by community requests means that the points are going where the demand is needed, which means they should be getting maximum usage. And hopefully the demand will grow, meaning the need for more charging points to be installed." Toby Butler, UK Managing Director of Ubitricity, said Liverpool is investing in an impressive on-street EV charging network, making the transition to EV much more accessible to their residents. In line with their plans to reach net zero by 2030, Liverpool is helping to lead the country, decarbonising their roads and improving air quality. By creating such a large and accessible public charging network, Liverpool City Council is paving the way for the residents of Liverpool who want to switch to electric vehicles. Ubitricity first appeared on Liverpool streets in 2018, having taken over the maintenance contract. Ubitricity is looking to dramatically improve the reliability of the existing charge points. The rollout of the new charge points is set to complete in spring 2023. Now, I think this is great news for Liverpool's residents, as long as you can maybe get over the whole "oh no, oil companies are running EV charging" thing. It remains to be seen what kind of format this on-street charging is going to take. I've seen some areas where it's shared use parking, so the bays end up iced an awful lot because anybody can park there. But then whilst EV adoption is still in its infancy, I can see the argument for not turning all of your on-street parking into EVs only by installing charging points on them. So I kind of see both sides of the argument there, and it's quite difficult to balance that. Let's hope that Liverpool Council get it right. That's all for this week's EV news. As always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on any or all of these stories. Make sure you've clicked that like button, and I'll see you next time.